Today, I'm going to tell you about one of the most intense urban combat operations I ever participated in during my 25 years of service. A mission that started as a hostage rescue, but turned into something much bigger, much deadlier. Operation Urban Viper, a house-to-house, block-by-block fight through a war-torn city in the Middle East that tested every ounce of training, courage, and brotherhood we had. Don't click away from this video, because I'm going to walk you through every detail of this operation, every decision that meant life or death, every moment that separated the warriors from everyone else. Every day on this channel, we bring you real military stories from my quarter-century of service, operations that most folks never hear about, missions that shape not just military doctrine, but the men who carried them out. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel so you get notified when I drop new military stories, and drop a comment below. I read every single one. Let me paint you the picture of where this all went down. Spring of 2004, somewhere in the Middle East. Can't get too specific about the exact location, you understand, but picture this. A city that once housed maybe 200,000 people, now looking like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie. Buildings with their guts blown out, concrete and rebar twisted like broken bones, streets carpeted with debris, and the smell of cordite hanging in the air like a toxic fog. The intel came down through channels about 72 hours before we rolled out. 4 American civilians, 2 journalists and 2 humanitarian workers had been grabbed by insurgents and were being held somewhere in the urban maze. These weren't just any hostages. One of the journalists had been documenting war crimes, and the humanitarian workers were part of a medical team that had been treating locals. The kind of people who put themselves in harm's way to help others, now caught in the crosshairs of a conflict that didn't give a damn about good intentions. I was Sergeant Major at the time, 23 years into my career, and I'd seen plenty of urban operations. Fallujah, Mogadishu, places where the concrete jungle becomes your enemy just as much as the guys shooting at you. But this one felt different from the get-go. The brass was breathing down our necks because of the media attention, and we had politicians back in Washington asking for hourly updates. Nothing makes a mission more complicated than having every pencil pusher from here to DC wanting their fingers in the pie. My team was a mixed bag, the kind of unit that gets thrown together when the situation demands the best from different specialties. We had Rangers from 2nd Battalion, some of the finest door kickers you'll ever meet. Marines from Force Recon, who could navigate urban terrain like they were born in it. A couple of Delta operators who shall remain nameless. And a Navy SEAL sniper who could put a round through a dime at 800 meters. 28 men total. All volunteers, all knowing we were walking into the kind of situation where not everyone comes home. The briefing took place in a converted shipping container that served as our tactical operations center. The walls were covered with satellite photos, street maps, and reconnaissance images that painted a grim picture. The city was divided into sectors, with insurgent activity reported in all of them. Our target area was designated as the Red Zone, roughly 12 city blocks of densely packed buildings, narrow alleyways, and rooftops that provided perfect overwatch positions for anyone wanting to rain hell down on American forces. Captain Rodriguez, our mission commander, laid it out straight. Gentlemen, we're looking at a classic urban warfare scenario with all the complications that come with it. Civilian population is still present, though most have bugged out. Infrastructure is compromised, no reliable power, water, or communications. The bad guys have had months to prepare this battlefield, and you can bet they've done so. The satellite imagery showed what we were up against. Every major intersection had been barricaded with concrete blocks and burned-out vehicles. Windows in multi-story buildings had been sandbagged, creating fighting positions with overlapping fields of fire. The insurgents weren't just random guys with AK-47s. This was organized, coordinated defense that someone with military training had set up. Our mission parameters were clear but challenging. Primary objective: locate and extract the 4 American hostages, alive if possible. Secondary objective: neutralize insurgent leadership and weapons caches in the target area. Rules of engagement were standard for urban operations. Positive identification required before engaging. Minimize collateral damage, but defend yourselves and your teammates with whatever force necessary. The timeline was tight. We had a narrow window of opportunity based on intelligence indicating the hostages were going to be moved within 48 hours. After that, they'd disappear into the broader insurgent network, and our chances of getting them back alive would drop to nearly zero. No pressure, right? Equipment check was crucial for this kind of operation. Each man carried his basic combat load: M4 carbine with multiple magazines, sidearm, grenades, medical supplies and communications gear. But urban warfare demanded specialized equipment. We had door charges for breaching, bolt cutters for wire obstacles, and extra medical supplies because in tight quarters, when things go sideways, they go sideways fast and people get hurt. I remember looking at the faces of my men during that final briefing. Some were veterans like myself, guys who'd been in more scrapes than they cared to remember. Others were younger, maybe on their 2nd or 3rd deployment, still carrying that mix of excitement and nervousness that comes before a major operation. But all of them had that look, that focused intensity that tells you they're ready to do whatever it takes to bring those hostages home and get their brothers home safely. The plan was straightforward in concept, complex in execution. We'd insert via helicopter during pre-dawn hours, establish a perimeter around the target area, then systematically clear buildings from south to north. Intelligence suggested the hostages were being held in one of 3 potential locations: an old school building, a mosque that had been converted to an insurgent stronghold, or a residential compound that our sources said was being used as a command center. Weather was a factor we couldn't control. Sandstorms had been rolling through the region for days, reducing visibility and grounding our air support for extended periods. The forecast called for clear skies during our insertion, but in that part of the world, weather can change faster than a politician's promise. As we loaded into the Black Hawks that would take us to our insertion point, I could feel the familiar pre-combat tension that every soldier knows. Your senses become hyper-aware, adrenaline starts flowing, and your mind shifts into that combat mindset where everything becomes crystal clear and focused. The helicopter crew chief gave us the 5-minute warning, and I looked down the line at my men one more time. "Listen up," I called over the rotor noise. "We've trained for this. We know what we're doing. Watch your sectors, watch your teammates' backs, and let's bring those people home." "Hoo-ah? Hoo-ah!" came back from 28 voices, strong and unified. The flight to the insertion point took about 20 minutes, flying low and fast over terrain that looked like the surface of Mars. The pilot was good, really good, keeping us under the radar horizon and using terrain features to mask our approach. As we got closer to the city, you could see the damage from previous fighting. Entire neighborhoods looked like they'd been hit by earthquakes, with collapsed buildings and smoke still rising from fires that had been burning for days. Our insertion went smooth as silk. 2 helicopters, 14 men each, fast roping into a cleared area about half a click from our target zone. The birds were on the ground for less than 60 seconds before they lifted off and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving us with nothing but the mission ahead and our training to see us through. The urban environment hit you immediately. The smell of concrete dust, burned metal and human waste mixing with the acrid tang of explosive residue. Every sound seemed amplified in the narrow streets. The crunch of debris under our boots, the whisper of tactical radios, the distant sound of dogs barking somewhere in the ruins. We moved in 2 columns, using standard urban patrol formation. Point man, team leader, automatic weapons, then the rest of the squad spread out with appropriate intervals. In urban terrain, bunching up gets people killed, but spreading out too much means you can't support each other when contact is made. It's a delicate balance that requires constant adjustment based on the terrain and threat level. The first 2 blocks were eerily quiet, too quiet. Any soldier with experience in urban warfare will tell you that silence in a hostile city is more unnerving than gunfire. At least when people are shooting at you, you know where they are and what they're thinking. Silence means they're watching, waiting, choosing their moment. Staff Sergeant Morrison, my point man, and a veteran of multiple urban deployments, held up a closed fist, the universal signal to freeze. Through my earpiece, his voice came through steady and professional. Movement, 2nd story window, 10 o'clock. Can't get positive ID. This is where training and experience separate the professionals from the amateurs. In movies, soldiers go charging in guns blazing. In real life, you take your time, assess the situation, and make smart decisions. We held position for a full 5 minutes, watching, waiting, trying to determine if what Morrison saw was a threat, a civilian, or just shadows playing tricks in the pre-dawn light. The rules of engagement in urban warfare are complex, especially when civilians are involved. You can't just light up every window that shows movement, but you also can't afford to give armed insurgents the first shot. It's a chess game where the wrong move gets your teammates killed, and every decision carries weight that follows you home. Negative on the movement, Morrison whispered after what felt like an eternity. Probably just debris shifting in the wind. We resumed our patrol, but the tension had ratcheted up several notches. Everyone was now hyper-aware that we were being watched, evaluated, and possibly targeted. The insurgents were choosing their time and place, which meant we needed to be ready for contact at any moment. The first building we needed to clear was a 3-story residential structure that intelligence suggested might house a weapons cache. Standard urban clearing procedures are methodical and exhausting. Every room, every closet, every space big enough to hide a person or a weapon gets searched. It's slow, dangerous work that requires absolute coordination between team members. Corporal Jenkins and Private Martinez took point on the door. Jenkins carried the breaching charge, while Martinez covered him with his M4 ready. The rest of the team stacked up behind them in proper sequence. Designated shooters, medic and support personnel, all in predetermined positions that we'd practiced hundreds of times. "Breacher ready," Jenkins whispered into his mic. "Execute, execute, execute," I commanded. The explosive charge detonated with a sharp crack that echoed off the surrounding buildings like a gunshot. The door disintegrated in a shower of wood splinters and metal fragments, and my men flowed through the breach like water through a broken dam. Clear left, clear right, moving to stairs. The practiced ballet of urban warfare played out as it had countless times in training. Each man knew his role, his sector of responsibility, his place in the sequence. Room by room, floor by floor, the building was systematically searched and cleared. The ground floor yielded nothing but abandoned furniture and the detritus of families who had fled the fighting. Personal belongings scattered in the haste of departure. Children's toys, family photos, cooking utensils that spoke of normal lives interrupted by war. It's one of the hardest parts of urban warfare, seeing the human cost of conflict in such personal, intimate terms. Second floor was the same story. Empty rooms, broken windows with boards nailed over them, and the persistent smell of cordite that permeated everything in that part of the city. But as we approached the third floor, things changed. "Got something here, Sergeant Major," called Specialist Thompson from the stairwell. "Looks like someone's been using this as an observation post recently." I moved up to his position and immediately saw what he meant. Sandbags had been positioned around the windows, creating firing ports that provided excellent fields of fire over the surrounding streets. Empty ammunition boxes were stacked in one corner, and the floor was littered with cigarette butts and food wrappers, clear evidence of recent occupation. "How recent?" I asked, examining the evidence. Thompson picked up one of the food wrappers and felt it between his fingers. still pliable. I'd say 24 to 48 hours max. This changed things. We weren't just moving through abandoned territory. We were operating in an area that the insurgents were actively using. That meant they knew we were here, they were watching us, and they were probably preparing a reception committee. As if to confirm my thoughts, the radio crackled with a transmission from our Overwatch team positioned on a building 2 blocks south. "Base, this is Overwatch. We've got movement in multiple buildings around your position. Count at least 6 different locations with what appears to be armed individuals taking positions. They're not engaging, but they're definitely tracking your movement." Perfect. We were walking into a fishbowl, and the fish were armed with automatic weapons and explosives. "Copy, Overwatch. Continue surveillance and advise of any immediate threats," I responded, then switched to the team frequency. "All elements, be advised we have multiple potentially hostile observers in the area. Maintain tactical spacing and be prepared for contact from multiple directions." The next building on our clearance list was larger, a former office complex that had been partially collapsed by previous fighting. Half the structure was rubble, but the remaining portion offered multiple hiding places and elevated positions that would be perfect for an ambush. Intelligence suggested this might be one of the locations where the hostages were being held. As we approached the building, I could feel the weight of invisible eyes watching our every move. The insurgents were good. They were patient, disciplined, and they were choosing their moment carefully. In their position, I would have done the same thing. Let the Americans get deep into the urban maze, where their advantages in firepower and air support would be minimized, then hit them from multiple directions simultaneously. Sergeant Williams, our communications specialist, tapped me on the shoulder and pointed to his radio. "Sir, we're getting intermittent jamming on some frequencies. Nothing that completely cuts us off, but it's degrading our communications with base. Electronic warfare in urban environments. Another lovely complication. The insurgents were using everything they had to level the playing field, and jamming our communications was a smart, tactical move. If they could isolate us from our support elements and command structure, they could turn this into the kind of close-quarters battle where superior training and equipment matter less than sheer determination and the ability to fight as a team. "Switch to backup frequencies and advise all elements," I ordered. "We proceed with the mission as planned." The office building clearing was going to be complex. Multiple entry points, internal stairs, and a layout that provided numerous opportunities for ambush. We split into 2 teams. Alpha Team would take the main entrance while Bravo Team entered through a breach in the side wall that had been created by previous fighting. I went with Alpha Team. Martinez and Rodriguez stacked up on the main entrance while the rest of us prepared to follow them in. The door was partially blocked by debris, but it was still our best option for a coordinated entry. 3, 2, 1, execute! We flowed through the entrance like we'd rehearsed 1,000 times, each man moving to his designated sector and calling out his status. The ground floor was a maze of cubicles and office furniture, all of it knocked around by the concussion of explosions and the passage of time. Dust particles danced in the shafts of sunlight that penetrated through broken windows, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that was completely at odds with the deadly nature of our work. "Contact! Contact! 2nd floor!" The sharp crack of AK-47 fire echoed through the building, followed immediately by the rapid response of our M4s. The distinctive sound of different weapon systems created a deadly symphony that any combat veteran recognizes instantly. The fight was on. "Alpha Team, report!" I called into my radio while moving toward the sound of the firefight. "Bravo Team in contact, 2nd floor eastern section. At least 3 insurgents in prepared positions. Taking effective fire, returning same. Need support on the western stairwell to flank their position." This was it. The moment when all the planning, all the training, all the preparation gets tested by the harsh reality of combat. In urban warfare, firefights are typically short, violent, and decisive. The side that can bring overwhelming firepower to bear quickly usually wins, but in a built-up area with multiple levels and countless hiding places, that's easier said than done. I grabbed Corporal Davis and Private Lynch. We're moving to support Bravo team. Watch your sectors and watch for crossfire. These buildings can become death traps real quick if we don't maintain fire discipline. The stairs to the second floor were narrow and cluttered with debris, the kind of bottleneck that makes every soldier's blood run cold. In a stairwell, there's nowhere to take cover, nowhere to maneuver, and the person at the top of the stairs has every advantage. We moved up carefully, each man covering the man in front of him, weapons ready, senses straining to detect any sign of enemy presence. The firefight above us intensified. The rapid chatter of automatic weapons mixed with the sharper crack of semi-automatic fire and the occasional thump of a grenade explosion. Through the smoke and dust, radio communications became fragmented and difficult to understand. Taking fire from can't see, need immediate, wounded. Wounded. The word every leader dreads hearing. In urban combat, casualties are inevitable, but they're also tactical problems that need to be solved quickly. A wounded man needs immediate medical attention, but he also needs to be protected and potentially evacuated, all while maintaining the tactical integrity of the unit and continuing the mission. We reached the second floor landing just as Staff Sergeant Morrison came sliding around the corner, dragging Private Wilson behind him. Wilson was conscious but bleeding from his shoulder, where an AK round had found the gap between his body armor plates. "Doc!" Morrison called for our medic while continuing to maintain security. Wilson took one in the shoulder, entry and exit. No arterial bleeding, but he needs attention. Hospital Corpsman 3rd Class Rodriguez. Everyone called him Doc, even though he was Navy, not Army. Moved immediately to Wilson's side. In the middle of a firefight, with bullets still flying and the smell of cordite thick in the air, Doc calmly began assessing and treating Wilson's wound. That's the kind of professionalism and dedication that defines military medicine. No matter what's happening around them, the medics focus on their job of keeping people alive. "You're gonna be fine, Wilson," Doc said while applying a pressure bandage. "Through and through missed everything important. You'll be back to annoying me with your bad jokes in no time." Wilson managed a weak grin. Just don't let my mom find out I got shot, Doc. She still thinks I'm stationed in Germany pushing papers." That's the kind of courage that defines the American soldier, wounded in a firefight, but still thinking about his mother worrying about him back home. It's moments like that which remind you why we fight and what we're fighting for. The tactical situation was stabilizing. Bravo team had successfully flanked the insurgent position and neutralized the 3 fighters who had been engaging us. The building was secure, but we hadn't found any trace of the hostages. More importantly, we'd learned that the insurgents were better organized and more heavily armed than our initial intelligence had suggested. As we prepared to move to the next objective, the sound of distant explosions echoed across the city. Someone was taking heavy contact in another sector, and from the volume of fire, it sounded like a major engagement. My radio crackled with reports from other units operating in different parts of the urban area. All stations, this is base. Be advised, significant insurgent activity reported throughout the operational area. Multiple units in contact. Air support is inbound, but will be limited due to proximity of civilian structures. The mission was escalating beyond what we had originally anticipated. What had started as a focused hostage rescue was turning into a larger urban battle with insurgent forces engaging American units across multiple sectors of the city. We were committed now. No turning back, no easy extraction. We had to push forward, find those hostages, and fight our way out. But first, we had to deal with Private Wilson's wound and reorganize our tactical formation. Doc had done good work. The bleeding was controlled and Wilson was stable, but he couldn't continue with the assault team. We needed to get him to a casualty collection point where he could receive proper medical attention and eventual evacuation. The nearest collection point was 6 blocks away, through territory that we hadn't cleared, and that was probably crawling with insurgents who now knew exactly where we were and what we were doing. It was going to be a long day, and the sun hadn't even fully risen yet. Getting Wilson to that casualty collection point turned into its own tactical nightmare. The route we'd planned was now compromised. Intelligence was reporting heavy insurgent movement along our primary and secondary evacuation routes. We had to improvise, adapt, and overcome, just like the Marines taught us. I made the call to split our forces temporarily. Half the team would escort Wilson to safety, while the rest of us continued the mission. It wasn't ideal. Dividing your forces in enemy territory goes against every principle of small unit tactics, but we didn't have a choice. Those hostages weren't going to rescue themselves, and every hour we delayed gave the insurgents more time to move them, or worse. Sergeant First Class Thompson volunteered to lead the casualty evacuation team. Thompson was solid, 15 years in the Army, 3 combat deployments, and the kind of NCO who'd walk through hell for his soldiers. If anyone could get Wilson to safety, it was him. "Take Rodriguez, Martinez, and Davis," I told Thompson. "Move fast, stay low, and use the northern route. It's longer but should be clearer of hostiles." Thompson nodded grimly. "We'll get him there, Sergeant Major. You just worry about finding those civilians." As Thompson's team disappeared into the maze of rubble-strewn streets, I felt the weight of command settle heavier on my shoulders. Now I had 14 men instead of 28, and we were deep in hostile territory with limited support and degraded communications. But we'd trained for this kind of situation. Special operations is all about small teams accomplishing big missions against overwhelming odds. The intelligence update we received changed everything. Our sources inside the insurgent network had managed to get word to us that the hostages had been moved to the old mosque we'd identified as a potential location. But here's the kicker. They weren't just being held there. The mosque had been turned into a command center for insurgent operations in this sector of the city, which meant it was going to be heavily defended by fighters who knew every inch of the building. Captain Rodriguez pulled me aside for a quick tactical conference. "Steve, this changes the entire dynamic. We're not just doing a hostage rescue anymore. We're assaulting a fortified position that could have anywhere from 10 to 50 insurgents inside." I studied the reconnaissance photos of the mosque. It was a beautiful building, or had been before the war. Traditional Islamic architecture with a central dome, 4 minarets, and thick stone walls that would provide excellent protection against small arms fire. The main entrance faced west toward Mecca, but there were multiple side entrances and the possibility of tunnels connecting to adjacent buildings. "What's our air support situation?" I asked. Rodriguez shook his head. "Limited. The building's too close to civilian structures, and there are reports of non-combatants in the area. We can get helicopter gunship support if things go completely sideways, but precision strikes are off the table." So we were doing this the hard way. Close quarters battle in a fortified religious structure with American hostages inside and potential civilian casualties to consider. The rules of engagement became even more restrictive, and the margin for error dropped to 0. But here's what separates elite units from regular infantry. We train for the impossible missions. Every scenario that makes other soldiers shake their heads and walk away, that's exactly what we prepare for. Urban warfare, hostage rescue, fighting in religious sites, while minimizing collateral damage. We'd done it all in training, and now it was time to put that training to work. I gathered my remaining men around a pile of rubble that provided concealment from potential snipers. Looking at their faces, I saw the same determined focus that had carried us through every other impossible mission. These weren't kids playing soldier. These were professionals who understood the stakes and were ready to do whatever it took to bring those Americans home. "Here's the situation," I briefed them. 4 hostages, unknown number of insurgents, fortified position. We're going in fast and hard, but we're going in smart. Rules of engagement remain in effect. Positive identification before firing, watch for civilians, and remember that those hostages are counting on us to get this right. The approach to the mosque required us to cross 200 meters of open ground that had once been a marketplace. Now it was a field of debris and burned-out vehicles that provided some concealment, but also channeled our movement into predictable routes. Any insurgent with half a brain would have that area pre-sighted for mortars or machine gun fire. We moved in bounds, one team providing overwatch while the other moved, then switching roles. It's textbook infantry tactics, but in urban terrain, with multiple elevated firing positions, even basic movement becomes a complex chess game where one wrong move gets people killed. Halfway across the marketplace, the world exploded. The first mortar round hit about 50 meters to our left, sending chunks of concrete and twisted metal flying through the air like deadly confetti. The distinctive whistle of incoming rounds filled the air, followed by the ground-shaking impacts that make your teeth rattle and your ears ring. "Incoming! Take cover!" My men scattered to whatever concealment they could find, behind overturned cars, in shell craters, behind piles of rubble that provided minimal protection against indirect fire. The insurgents had pre-positioned mortars with the marketplace already dialed in. They'd been waiting for us to expose ourselves in that open ground. The barrage lasted maybe 90 seconds, but when you're hugging the ground while high explosives are raining down around you, time moves differently. Each impact sounds like it's going to land right on top of you, and you find yourself making deals with whatever higher power you believe in. When the mortars stopped, the silence was almost as unnerving as the explosions had been. Smoke and dust filled the air, making it hard to see more than a few meters in any direction. The smell of cordite mixed with pulverized concrete created a chemical fog that burned your lungs and made your eyes water. "Sound off! Everyone check in!" One by one, my soldiers called out their status. Somehow, miraculously, no one had taken a direct hit. A few minor cuts from flying debris, some ringing ears, but everyone was combat effective. The insurgents' timing had been good, but their accuracy needed work. "They know exactly where we are now," observed Corporal Jenkins, spitting dust and checking his weapon for damage. "That was a probing attack, testing our response and marking our positions." Jenkins was right. The mortar attack wasn't meant to destroy us. It was reconnaissance by fire, designed to make us reveal our positions and capabilities. Now, the insurgents knew how many of us there were, how we responded to contact, and where we were headed. They were probably adjusting their defensive positions accordingly. We had 2 choices: abort the mission and extract, or press the attack before the insurgents could fully prepare their defenses. Aborting meant those 4 Americans probably died, and it meant every insurgent in the city would know that US forces could be driven off by a few mortar rounds. Pressing the attack meant accepting higher casualties, but maintaining the initiative. For me, it wasn't even a question. We'd come too far and lost too much to quit now. Those hostages were depending on us, and failure wasn't in our vocabulary. "We're moving to the mosque now before they can set up a proper defense," I decided. "Fast and violent, just like we trained. Everyone check your gear and get ready to rock and roll." The final approach to the mosque was a sprint across 50 meters of completely open ground. There was no cover, no concealment, just the need to move fast enough to make ourselves difficult targets while staying accurate enough to engage any threats that presented themselves. On my mark, move. 14 American soldiers charged across that open space like their lives depended on it, which they did. The insurgents opened up from multiple positions, muzzle flashes winking from windows and rooftops like deadly fireflies. The air filled with the crack of bullets, passing close enough to part your hair, and the whine of ricochets off stone and metal. Staff Sergeant Morrison was the first one to reach the mosque's outer wall, followed closely by Corporal Jenkins and Private Lynch. They immediately began returning fire while the rest of us covered the final distance to the building. The sound of gunfire was continuous now, a rolling thunder of automatic weapons that echoed off the surrounding buildings and made communication nearly impossible. "Breaching charge on the side entrance," Morrison called out, pulling the explosive device from his pack. 30 seconds. Those 30 seconds felt like 30 minutes. We were pinned against the wall of the mosque, taking fire from at least 3 different positions, with nowhere to go but forward through the breach that Morrison was preparing. The insurgents were good shots, and they were shooting to kill. Private Lynch suddenly spun around and dropped to one knee, blood spreading across his left thigh where a bullet had found its mark. Doc Rodriguez was immediately at his side, applying a pressure bandage while Lynch continued to return fire with his M4. "Just a flesh wound, Doc," Lynch gritted through clenched teeth. "Missed the bone. I can still fight." That's the kind of courage that defines the American soldier. Shot in the leg, bleeding, under intense enemy fire, and still thinking about the mission and his teammates instead of his own pain. "Charge set," Morrison announced. "Everyone get ready to move." The explosion blew a hole in the stone wall large enough for 2 men to enter simultaneously. Before the dust had even settled, Morrison and Jenkins were through the breach, followed immediately by the rest of the assault team. The systematic clearing of the mosque had begun. Inside, the building was dimly lit by sunlight filtering through stained glass windows that had somehow survived the fighting. The main prayer hall was a large, open space with ornate columns supporting a vaulted ceiling. Beautiful architecture that was now serving as a battlefield. The insurgents had prepared well. They'd positioned themselves behind the columns and in elevated positions around the gallery that ran around the upper level of the prayer hall. As soon as we entered, they opened fire from multiple directions simultaneously, but we'd prepared too. Urban combat training teaches you to use every advantage you can find, and the columns that gave them cover also provided cover for us. We moved through the space in coordinated fire teams, each one supporting the others while systematically clearing each position. Movement, upper gallery, 2 o'clock. The sharp crack of Sergeant Williams's rifle answered the call, and an insurgent tumbled from the upper level to crash onto the floor below. The return fire was immediate and intense, forcing us to take cover behind whatever we could find. This was close quarters battle at its most intense. Distances measured in meters instead of hundreds of yards, targets appearing and disappearing in seconds, the constant need to identify friend from foe in the chaos of combat. Every decision had to be made instantly, and every mistake could be fatal. "Hostages located!" came the call from Corporal Davis, who had pushed forward to a side room. 4 Americans, all alive, northwest corner of the building. That was the best news we'd heard all day, but it also complicated our tactical situation. Now we had to fight our way to the hostages, secure them, and fight our way back out, all while making sure they didn't get caught in the crossfire. The insurgents understood the tactical situation as well as we did. They concentrated their fire on the approaches to the hostage location, trying to pin us down and prevent us from reaching the Americans. The volume of fire increased dramatically as they threw everything they had at us. I want you to drop a comment below about what you think is going to happen in the final phase of this operation. Are we going to get those hostages out alive? How do you think we manage the extraction under such intense fire? Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more real military stories, and let me know in the comments what you think about urban warfare tactics. The fight for the mosque was reaching its climax, and the next few minutes would determine whether Operation Urban Viper ended in success or tragedy. Every round fired, every decision made, every step taken was bringing us closer to that moment when training, courage, and brotherhood would be tested against the harsh reality of combat. But that's what we signed up for. That's what makes the difference between warriors and everyone else. When civilians run away from danger, soldiers run toward it. When the situation looks hopeless, that's when training kicks in and heroes are made. The extraction phase was about to begin, and it was going to test everything we thought we knew about urban combat, teamwork, and what it really means to leave no one behind. The room where the hostages were being held was small, maybe 12 by 15 feet, with stone walls that had provided some protection from the gunfight raging outside. As Corporal Davis and I entered, I got my first look at the 4 Americans we'd come so far to rescue. 2 men, 2 women, all in their 30s or 40s, all showing the effects of several days in captivity. They were bound with zip ties, blindfolded, and positioned against the far wall where they'd be visible to anyone entering the room. Classic insurgent tactics. Use the hostages as human shields to complicate any rescue attempt. The journalists were Sarah Mitchell from CNN and David Park from the Washington Post. The humanitarian workers were Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a surgeon with Doctors Without Borders, and Michael Torres, a logistics coordinator with the Red Cross. All of them had that hollow-eyed look that comes from days of fear, uncertainty, and the constant threat of death. "American soldiers," I announced in a calm, authoritative voice as I cut their restraints. "We're here to get you out. I'm Sergeant Major Harris, U.S. Army. You're safe now, but we need to move quickly." The relief in their faces was immediate and overwhelming. Dr. Walsh started crying, not from fear, but from the sudden release of days of accumulated stress. Torres just kept saying, thank God," over and over. The journalists, trained to observe and report even in crisis situations, were already asking questions about the tactical situation. "How many insurgents?" Mitchell asked as I helped her to her feet. "How do we get out?" "Ma'am, I need you to trust us and follow our instructions exactly," I replied. "We're going to move you to safety, but it's going to be dangerous, and we need complete compliance with everything we tell you." Outside the hostage room, the firefight was intensifying. The insurgents had realized we'd found their prisoners and were throwing everything they had at us to prevent the extraction. The sound of automatic weapons fire was continuous, punctuated by the occasional explosion of grenades and the distinctive crack of sniper rifles. My radio crackled with reports from my team leaders positioned throughout the mosque. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. We were outnumbered, running low on ammunition, and the insurgents were reinforcing their positions with fighters from other parts of the city. "Sergeant Major, this is Williams. We've got movement on the eastern approach. Looks like at least a squad-sized element trying to flank our position. They're armed with RPGs and heavy machine guns." RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades, in an urban environment are a game changer. One well-placed shot can bring down a wall, collapse a ceiling, or turn a defensive position into a crater. The fact that the insurgents were bringing heavy weapons to bear meant they were serious about preventing us from leaving with those hostages. "Copy, Williams. How's our ammunition situation?" "Running low across the board, maybe 10 minutes of sustained fire left before we start running dry." 10 minutes. In a firefight, 10 minutes can feel like 10 hours. But when you're planning an extraction under fire, it's not nearly enough time. We needed to move now while we still had the ammunition to fight our way out. I made the tactical decision to use smoke grenades to conceal our movement. It's a risky tactic in urban warfare because smoke cuts both ways. It hides you from the enemy, but it also hides the enemy from you. In close quarters, that can lead to friendly fire incidents or walking into an ambush you can't see coming. All elements, prepare for extraction by bounds under smoke cover. Civilians will move in the center of the formation with maximum protection. We move in 30 seconds. The hostages were civilians, But they were also people who had chosen to work in dangerous places, which meant they understood that sometimes bad situations require you to do things that feel wrong. When I explained that we were going to run through a building full of armed insurgents while people shot at us, they didn't panic or argue. They just asked what they needed to do to help. That's the kind of courage that doesn't come from military training. That's ordinary people choosing to be extraordinary when the situation demands it. Corporal Jenkins popped the first smoke grenade, filling the prayer hall with thick grey smoke that reduced visibility to maybe 3 feet. The insurgents' fire became less accurate immediately, but it also became more random and therefore potentially more dangerous. When people can't see what they're shooting at, they tend to spray bullets everywhere. Move! 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 We flowed out of that room like a tide of green and brown, the hostages protected in the center of our formation, while the assault teams provided security on all sides. The smoke was so thick you could barely see the person next to you, which made movement coordination incredibly difficult. Private Lynch, still bleeding from his leg wound, had somehow managed to stay with the team throughout the entire assault. As we moved through the smoke-filled mosque, he was right there, limping but keeping up, rifle ready, covering his sector like the professional soldier he was. "Lynch, you should have gone out with the casualty evacuation," I told him during a brief halt. "With respect, Sergeant Major, my place is here with the team. These people need every rifle we can put on the line." That's leadership by example. Lynch could have taken the easy way out, used his wound as justification to leave the dangerous work to someone else. Instead, he chose to stay and fight, putting the mission and his teammates above his own comfort and safety. The extraction from the mosque was a fighting withdrawal, the most dangerous type of military movement. You have to move backward while maintaining security to your front, all while protecting non-combatants who don't understand military movement techniques. It requires absolute discipline, perfect coordination, and more than a little luck. As we reached the breach point where we'd entered the building, the insurgents made their final push. They must have realized this was their last chance to prevent us from escaping with the hostages, because they came at us with everything they had left. The volume of fire was unlike anything I'd experienced in urban combat. Bullets were coming from every direction. Windows, doorways, rooftops, ground-level positions. The air was filled with the whine of ricochets and the sharp crack of near misses. Pieces of stone and metal flew through the air like shrapnel as rounds impacted the ancient walls of the mosque. Dr. Walsh was hit by a piece of flying debris that opened a gash on her forehead. But she kept moving, blood streaming down her face, following Staff Sergeant Morrison, who had taken point for the civilian evacuation. Torres stumbled and fell, but Corporal Davis was immediately there to help him up and keep him moving. "Covering fire! Covering fire!" I yelled into my radio, and my men responded with disciplined, aimed fire that forced the insurgents to take cover and gave us the few seconds we needed to get the hostages through the breach. Once we were outside the mosque, we still had 200 meters of open ground to cross before we reached the relative safety of the buildings on the other side of the marketplace. 200 meters doesn't sound like much until you're running across it while people are shooting at you with automatic weapons. The smoke grenades had burned out, leaving us exposed in broad daylight. The insurgents on the rooftops had clear fields of fire, and they were making the most of their advantages. Muzzle flashes winked from a dozen different positions as they tried to cut us down in the open. That's when our air support finally arrived. The distinctive sound of rotor blades announced the arrival of 2 AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, their 30mm chain guns already spinning up as they acquired targets. The pilots had been monitoring our radio traffic and understood the tactical situation perfectly. "Ground team, this is Apache lead. We have visual on multiple insurgent positions. Danger close fire mission, how copy?" Danger close means the friendly forces are so near to the target that they're within the minimum safe distance for air-delivered weapons. It's the kind of fire mission that requires absolute trust between ground forces and air crews, because one small mistake and you end up killing your own people. Apache lead cleared hot. Friendlies are moving west across the marketplace. Targets are in buildings north and south of our position. The Apaches opened fire with a sound like the world's largest chainsaw. The 30mm high explosive rounds tore into the insurgent positions with devastating effect, silencing the rooftop snipers and forcing the remaining fighters to take cover or flee. Under the protective fire of the attack helicopters, we completed our extraction from the immediate danger area. The hostages were exhausted, scared, and in some cases lightly wounded, but they were alive and free. More importantly, they had witnessed firsthand the dedication and professionalism of American soldiers who had risked everything to bring them home. The extraction helicopter was waiting for us at a landing zone about half a mile from the mosque. As we approached the LZ, I could see Thompson's team already there with Private Wilson, who was receiving medical attention from the helicopter crew's medic. Everyone was accounted for. Everyone was going home. As the helicopter lifted off and banked away from that war-torn city, I looked back at the mosque where we'd fought for those 4 Americans. Smoke was still rising from several buildings, and I could see insurgent fighters moving through the streets below, reorganizing after their defeat. Dr. Walsh grabbed my arm and had to shout over the rotor noise to make herself heard. "Sergeant Major, I want you to know that what you and your men did today, there aren't words for it. You saved our lives." I looked around at my soldiers, dirty, tired, some wounded, all of them proud of what they'd accomplished. These were the men who had walked into hell and brought out 4 innocent people who had been marked for death. They had faced overwhelming odds, taken casualties, and never wavered in their commitment to the mission. "Ma'am, this is what we do," I replied. "This is why we wear the uniform." But the cost had been significant. Wilson would recover from his shoulder wound, but it would be months before he was combat-ready again. Lynch's leg wound would require surgery and extensive physical therapy. Several other team members had minor injuries that would affect their combat effectiveness for weeks or months. More importantly, the emotional cost of urban warfare follows you home. The images of that mosque, the sound of bullets whistling past your head, the smell of cordite and blood, those memories don't fade. They become part of who you are, part of the price you pay for choosing to serve your country in harm's way. The after-action review revealed that we had faced approximately 40 insurgent fighters armed with automatic weapons, RPGs, mortars, and improvised explosive devices. Intelligence estimates suggested that at least 15 insurgents had been killed and many more wounded. The mosque had been effectively neutralized as a command center, and several weapons caches had been destroyed in the fighting. But statistics don't tell the real story of Operation Urban Viper. The real story is about ordinary Americans who chose to do extraordinary things when their country called. It's about soldiers who were willing to risk their lives for people they'd never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. It's about the bond between warriors that transcends rank, race, religion, and background. When you've been in combat with someone, when you've trusted them with your life, and they've trusted you with theirs, that creates a connection that civilians often find difficult to understand. Years later, I still keep in touch with the men who served with me in that mosque. We don't talk much about the fighting. We don't need to. We know what we did together, and we know what it meant. We also know that if the situation arose again, we'd do it all over again, without hesitation. The 4 hostages all returned safely to their families. Dr. Walsh continued her humanitarian work, though in less dangerous locations. Torres took a position with the Red Cross in the United States, coordinating international relief efforts. The 2 journalists went on to win awards for their reporting on the human cost of war. They all sent letters to our unit, thanking us for what we'd done. But they didn't need to thank us. We were just doing our jobs, fulfilling the oath we'd taken to protect and defend, living up to the standards that generations of American soldiers had set before us. Urban warfare is the most challenging form of combat that modern soldiers face. It requires technical skill, physical courage, mental toughness, and the ability to make life and death decisions in seconds while protecting innocent civilians. It's warfare where the margin for error is zero and the consequences of failure are measured in human lives. But it's also where you see the very best of what the American military represents. When everything is on the line, when the odds are against you, when failure means innocent people die, that's when training, leadership, and the warrior ethos come together to accomplish the impossible. If you enjoyed this story of Operation Urban Viper, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our military stories. Give this video a thumbs up if you appreciate the sacrifices our service members make every day, and drop a comment below letting me know what you thought about this mission. Every week on this channel, I share real stories from my 25 years of military service, operations that tested the limits of human endurance, courage, and brotherhood. These aren't Hollywood fantasies. These are the real experiences of real soldiers doing their jobs in the most dangerous places on Earth. Check out the pinned comment below for links to more military stories, and remember that freedom isn't free. It's paid for by the blood, sweat, and sacrifice of men and women who choose to serve something greater than themselves. Until next time, stay strong, stay proud, and never forget the warriors who stand watch so you can sleep safely in your beds. Hooah!